My son texted me at 7:14 a.m. on Christmas morning. Rachel wants just family this year. Don't come. I stared at the message longer than I'd like to admit, my thumb hovering over the screen as if I could rewrite the words just by holding it there. Just family. I read it again. Then again. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. The tree in the corner blinked softly, lights reflecting off ornaments I'd collected over 40 years, each one tied to a memory, a moment, a person who used to sit around my table. I had already set the table for 6. My good china, the one with the thin gold rim. I even polished the silverware the night before. Habit, I suppose. Or hope. I set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter if I moved too fast. No call followed. No, Mom, I'm sorry. Just silence. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee, though I didn't really want it. The pot had been ready since 6. I always woke up early on Christmas. Old habits don't leave just because people do. I carried the mug to the living room and sat down, the message still glowing faintly in my mind. Rachel wants just family. I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh. Funny how a single sentence can rearrange your entire understanding of things. For years, I had adjusted. Stepped back when Rachel took over the holidays. Let her choose the menu, the decorations, even the guest list. It's easier this way, Daniel used to say. Less stress. I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to. My phone buzzed again. Not a message this time. A notification. I glanced down, almost without thinking. A photo. Then another. And another. There they were. Daniel at the head of the table. Rachel beside him, smiling that careful, polished smile. The kids in matching sweaters I hadn't seen before. My table. My dining room. My centerpiece, the one I arranged last year, sitting right where I always placed it. I zoomed in slightly, my fingers steady. Even the candles were the same. For a moment, I didn't feel anything. Not anger. Not sadness, just a kind of stillness. Like everything inside me had paused, waiting for something to catch up. I set the phone down. Again, this time face down. The coffee had gone cold in my hands, but I didn't move. Instead, I found myself thinking about the cottage. The one by Lake Alder. 2 hours out, give or take. Daniel used to love that place when he was a boy, fishing off the dock, running through the trees, saying he'd live there one day. Rachel had asked about it more than once over the past year. Casual questions. Is it fully paid off? Do you still go up there often? That area must be worth a fortune now. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Just conversation. Just curiosity. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the street was empty. A few houses down, I could see a family unloading gifts from their car, laughing, calling out to each other. I watched them for a moment, then turned away. Back to the quiet. Back to the house that suddenly felt larger than it had yesterday. I picked up my phone one more time and opened the message. Don't come. I read it out loud this time, softly, just to hear how it sounded in the air. Then I nodded, almost to myself, and reached for my keys. I did not go back to the table. I did not blow out the candles. I left everything exactly as it was, as if someone might still walk through the door and apologize for being late. Instead, I grabbed my coat, my purse, and the keys I had just set down moments ago, and I stepped outside into the cold morning air. The sky was pale gray, the kind that makes everything feel quieter than it should be. I sat in my car for a second, hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the engine warm up while my thoughts slowly arranged themselves into something clearer. It was not anger. Not yet. It was something sharper. Something that felt like understanding. Rachel wants just family. I said it again in my head, this time without confusion. Just family. I backed out of the driveway and started down the road, passing houses dressed in lights and wreaths, families gathered behind windows, silhouettes moving in warm, familiar patterns. I had spent years believing I was still part of that picture, that I simply needed to adjust, to give space, to not make things complicated. But something about this morning stripped all of that away. The message had been simple, clean, final. Do not come. I drove past the turn that would have taken me toward Daniel's house, without slowing down. Instead, I headed toward the highway. 2 hours to Lake Alder. I knew the drive by heart. I had made it countless times over the years, sometimes alone, sometimes with Daniel when he was younger, his voice filling the car with questions, laughter, plans. He used to say the cottage felt like ours. Not mine. Ours. I tightened my grip on the wheel slightly, then relaxed it. The road stretched out ahead, long and quiet, just like the ones I used to take when I needed to think. By the time I reached the first gas station outside the city, I had already made one decision. I pulled in, filled the tank, and stood there for a moment as the numbers climbed, watching the total settle as if it meant something more than just a transaction. When I got back in the car, I did not turn on the radio. I let the silence stay. It helped me see things more clearly. Rachel's questions over the past year were no longer small. They lined up now, one after another, like pieces of a pattern I had not wanted to recognize. The paperwork, the taxes, whether the property was in my name alone, whether I had considered simplifying things. I remembered the way she would smile when she asked, light and casual, as if it were all just curiosity. And Daniel, standing beside her, quiet, nodding, letting the questions pass through him without comment. I exhaled slowly. The cottage came into view just after noon, tucked between the trees, exactly as I had left it the last time. The lake beyond it was still, a thin layer of winter frost catching the light. I parked, stepped out, and stood there for a moment, looking at the place that had held so many versions of my life. Nothing had changed. Not the porch, not the railing, not the worn path leading down to the water. I walked inside and set my keys on the small wooden table by the door. The air was cool, untouched. I moved through the room slowly, not lingering, not rushing, just observing. This place had always been more than a property. It was memory. It was history. It was something I had protected without question. Until now. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I had not used in years. The call connected after 2 rings. "This is Michael Harris," the voice said, steady and professional. I looked out the window at the frozen lake and spoke calmly. "Michael, this is Margaret Collins. I need to speak with you about selling a property. As soon as possible." There was a brief pause on the other end, then a shift in his tone. "Of course, Margaret. Tell me what you need." I did not hesitate. Not this time. Michael arrived the next morning just after 9, his black sedan pulling up slowly along the gravel path, as if he already understood this was not a casual visit. I had spent the night at the cottage, sleeping lightly, waking more than once to the quiet creak of the house settling around me. By the time the sun rose over the lake, I was already dressed, already certain. When I opened the door, Michael gave me a polite nod, his expression calm but attentive, the kind of look that comes from years of seeing people at turning points in their lives. He stepped inside, glancing briefly around the room before setting his briefcase down on the table. "It has been a while, Margaret," he said gently. I nodded. "It has." There was no need for small talk. Not today. I walked him through the house, pointing out the details he would need, the updates that had been made, the condition of the structure, the land boundaries that extended just past the tree line. My voice remained steady, almost detached, as if I were describing something that belonged to someone else. He listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes, occasionally asking precise questions. Square footage. Year of last renovation. Property taxes. I answered each one without hesitation. At one point, he paused near the window overlooking the lake and looked back at me. "This is a significant asset," he said. "Are you certain you want to move quickly?" I met his eyes without flinching. "Yes. I do not need to hold on to things that no longer hold on to me." He studied my face for a moment, as if weighing whether to ask more, then simply nodded. "Understood." We sat down at the table, and he opened his briefcase, laying out documents with practiced precision. The process began immediately. No delays, no second thoughts. As he explained the steps, the timelines, the potential offers, I found myself remembering something small, something I had almost forgotten. The first time Rachel visited this place, she had stood right where Michael was standing now, looking out at the lake, her eyes moving slowly, measuring, calculating. "It is beautiful," she had said, but there had been something in her tone that did not quite match the words. Not warmth, not nostalgia, just interest. Later that afternoon, she had asked me how often I came up here alone. I had told her the truth. Often. She had smiled then, a thin, thoughtful smile. I had not understood it at the time. Now, sitting across from Michael, watching the paperwork take shape, I understood everything with a clarity that left no room for doubt. This had never been about family gatherings or shared memories. It had been about positioning, about waiting, about deciding when I would no longer be necessary. I signed the first document without hesitation, my pen moving smoothly across the page. Then the next, and the next. Each signature felt lighter than I expected, not heavier, as if I were setting something down instead of giving something up. Michael gathered the papers carefully, placing them back into his briefcase. I will start the listing process immediately, he said. Given the location, I expect interest very quickly. I nodded. That is fine. He stood, pausing for a moment before heading toward the door. If you need anything, Margaret, you call me directly. I will. After he left, the house felt even quieter than before, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not empty, not hollow, just still. I walked back to the window and looked out at the lake one more time. The surface had begun to thaw slightly under the afternoon sun, small ripples forming where there had been none the day before. I stayed there for a while, not thinking about Daniel, not thinking about Rachel, not even thinking about what would come next. Just standing, just breathing. For the first time in a long while, nothing felt uncertain. Everything had already been decided. The offer came faster than Michael predicted. 48 hours. That was all it took. By the second afternoon, my phone rang while I was sitting on the small wooden chair near the window, the same place where Daniel used to sit with his fishing rod propped against the wall, asking me endless questions about things that did not matter and somehow mattered more than anything else. I let the phone ring once, twice, then answered. Margaret, Michael said, his voice measured but with a slight edge of urgency. We have a serious buyer. Full price. No contingencies. They want to move quickly. I did not ask who. It did not matter. I looked around the room slowly, taking in the familiar lines of the furniture, the faint scratches on the floor, the small imperfections that only someone who had lived there would notice. That is fine, I said. Proceed. There was a brief pause on the other end, as if he expected hesitation or perhaps a question. When none came, he continued outlining the next steps, the closing timeline, the documents that would need to be signed. I listened, but my attention had already shifted somewhere else. Not to the past this time, but forward. Clean. Clear. Final. After the call ended, I stood up and began moving through the cottage again, not slowly like before, but with purpose. I opened drawers, cabinets, closets. I did not take much. Just a small box of photographs, a few personal items, the things that belonged to me in a way that could not be measured in square footage or market value. Everything else stayed exactly where it was. The furniture, the dishes, even the old quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. I left it all behind without second thought. By evening, the box sat in the passenger seat of my car, and the cottage stood exactly as it had for years, unchanged on the outside, but no longer mine. I locked the door carefully, sliding the key off the ring and holding it in my hand for a moment. It felt lighter than I expected. I placed it in the small envelope Michael had given me and set it on the dashboard. When I drove away, I did not look back immediately. The road curved through the trees, slowly pulling the house out of view until it was no longer there at all. Only then did I exhale, a long, steady breath I did not realize I had been holding. The next morning, I was back in my own house, the one with the empty table still set for 6. Nothing had been touched. The plates were exactly where I left them. The candles burned down to stubs. I walked in, set my keys on the counter, and began clearing the table one piece at a time. Plate, fork, glass. Each sound was small, controlled. No rush, no hesitation. When everything was put away, the room looked like it always did. Clean, quiet, empty. My phone buzzed again just as I finished drying the last dish. A message this time. Daniel. I dried my hands slowly before picking it up. Hey, Mom. Sorry about yesterday. Things got a little busy. Rachel thought it would be easier to keep it small this year. We will make it up to you soon. I read it once, then again, the words settling into place with a familiarity that no longer surprised me. Easier. Small. Soon. I set the phone down without replying. Minutes later, another message followed. Also, Rachel and I were thinking maybe we should come by this week. Talk about the cottage. There are some things we need to figure out. I looked at the screen for a long moment, then turned it face down on the counter. The house was quiet again, but this time it did not feel heavy. It felt resolved. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, tires humming softly against the pavement. I walked to the window and watched it disappear, my reflection faint in the glass. They were already too late. They just did not know it yet. I did not respond to his messages that day, or the next. I let them sit there, unread in his mind, even though I had already read every word. There is a difference between silence and absence. Silence, when chosen, has weight. It has direction. By the third day, the house had settled into a new rhythm. No table set for 6. No extra place settings waiting for people who had already decided not to come. Just one cup of coffee in the morning, one plate at night. Clean. Simple. Mine. On the 4th morning, my phone rang instead of buzzing. I glanced at the screen. Daniel. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering. Mom. His voice carried that careful tone I had heard many times before. The one he used when he knew something was slightly off, but had not yet decided how serious it was. I sent you a couple of messages. Did you get them? I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the quiet street. I did. A brief pause. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Rachel and I were thinking we could stop by later today. Maybe around 2. We should talk about the cottage. There it was again. Not how I was. Not whether I needed anything. Just the cottage. I let a second pass before answering. 2 o'clock is fine. His voice relaxed slightly, as if a small obstacle had been cleared. Great. We will see you then. The call ended quickly after that, efficient, almost businesslike. I set the phone down and stood up, moving through the house with slow, deliberate steps. There was nothing to prepare, nothing to arrange. For the first time in years, I did not feel the need to make things comfortable for them. No extra dishes. No coffee brewing in advance. No effort to soften the edges of what was about to happen. At exactly 2 o'clock, their car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as Daniel stepped out first, adjusting his jacket, glancing briefly at his phone. Rachel followed a second later, her posture straight, her expression composed, that same polished calm she always carried into every room. They walked up to the door together, and I opened it before they could knock. Mom, Daniel said, offering a quick smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He stepped forward as if to hug me, but I did not move. The moment passed, and he lowered his arm slightly, covering it with a small adjustment of his sleeve. It is good to see you, Rachel added, her voice smooth, measured. I stepped aside and let them in. They moved into the living room, looking around as if taking inventory of something that no longer concerned them. Daniel sat down first. Rachel remained standing. For a moment, her eyes scanning the space, then took a seat beside him. We wanted to talk about the cottage, Daniel began, leaning forward slightly, hands clasped together. It might be time to think about what to do with it. It is a lot for you to manage on your own, and honestly, it could be a really smart move if we handle it the right way. I nodded once, slowly, as if considering his words. Rachel leaned in just enough to join the conversation without interrupting. There are buyers in that area who would pay very well, she said. But timing is important. If we wait too long, the market could shift. I watched them both for a moment, noting the rhythm of their voices, the quiet coordination between them, the way they built the argument together as if it had been rehearsed. Then I spoke, my voice even, unhurried. You are right about one thing, I said. Timing is important. Daniel's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. Rachel's eyes sharpened, just for a second. Exactly, she said softly. So we were thinking. I raised my hand gently, not to interrupt, but to pause the momentum they had already started to build. You do not need to think about it anymore, I said. The room went still. Daniel blinked once. What do you mean? I met his eyes, then Rachel's, holding both without hesitation. I have already taken care of it. Daniel's expression froze for a fraction of a second, the kind of pause that only happens when something does not fit the version of reality he had already built in his head. Taken care of? He repeated, slower this time, as if the words might change meaning if he said them differently. Rachel did not speak right away. She was watching me, her eyes narrowing slightly, measuring, recalculating. I remained standing, my posture relaxed, my hands resting lightly at my sides. Yes, I said. I sold it. The silence that followed was not loud. It was precise. Daniel leaned back slightly, his brows pulling together in confusion. Sold it? He said again, this time with a small, uncertain laugh that did not belong in the room. Mom, what do you mean you sold it? Rachel shifted beside him, her composure still intact, but thinner now, like a surface beginning to crack. When? She asked, her voice controlled, but sharper than before. I walked past them calmly and sat down in the chair across from them. The same chair I had sat in just days earlier, when everything still felt unclear. 2 days after Christmas, I said. Full price. No delays. Daniel blinked, his mouth opening slightly before closing again. He looked at Rachel, then back at me, as if expecting one of us to correct the statement. You sold the cottage? He said, slower now, each word landing heavier than the last. Without talking to us. I held his gaze without shifting. There was nothing to discuss. Rachel leaned forward then, her hands clasping together tightly, the first visible sign that something inside her had slipped. Margaret, she said, her tone carefully composed again, but strained underneath. That is a major decision. We could have helped you evaluate your options. There are tax implications, long-term considerations. I have already considered them, I said quietly. She stopped mid-sentence, her lips pressing together for a brief moment. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his movements quicker now, less controlled. Mom, that place means a lot, he said, searching for the right words. I grew up there. We were just trying to figure out the best way to handle it for everyone. I watched him carefully, noticing the shift in his language. Not you. Everyone. You mean for you, I said calmly. The words landed without force, but they did not need any. Daniel's face tightened slightly. That is not what I meant. It is exactly what you meant, I replied, still without raising my voice. Rachel straightened in her seat, her eyes steady on mine now, no longer pretending softness. We were thinking long-term, she said. That property could have stayed in the family. It could have been an investment for the future. I nodded once, slowly. And now it is not. Another silence. This one heavier. Daniel exhaled sharply, leaning back as if trying to create space between himself and the conversation. I do not understand why you would do that without even telling us, he said. I let a moment pass before answering, giving the question the same weight it deserved. Because you already told me everything I needed to know, I said. Rachel's eyes flickered, just for a second. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? I looked at him steadily, my voice even, clear. Christmas morning, I said, when I was told not to come because I was not considered family. The words settled into the room slowly, filling the space between us. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. Rachel did not move. That message made things very simple. I continued. If I am not part of the family, then what belongs to me does not belong to it either. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to explain. The decision had already been made long before they walked through my door. And now, they were finally beginning to understand it. Daniel looked down at his hands for a long moment, as if the answer might be written there somewhere, something he had missed, something he could still fix. Mom, he said finally, quieter now. That was not what I meant. You know that. I did not respond right away. I let the silence sit between us, not as punishment, but as truth. Rachel shifted slightly beside him, her posture still composed, but her fingers now resting tightly against each other, the only sign that her control was no longer complete. It was just a misunderstanding, she said, her voice softer now, carefully measured again. We thought it would be less overwhelming this year. Smaller, more manageable. I tilted my head slightly, studying her words the same way she had once studied mine. Manageable for who? I asked. She did not answer immediately. Daniel exhaled slowly, leaning forward again, his tone shifting into something closer to pleading. We did not mean to hurt you, he said. It was just one holiday. That does not mean you are not family. I looked at him, really looked this time, and for a brief moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who ran down the dock at the cottage, calling my name without hesitation, without calculation. Then it passed. Family is not something you turn on and off when it is convenient, I said, quietly. It is not something you reduce when it becomes inconvenient. Rachel's expression tightened slightly, just enough to reveal the thought she was trying to keep hidden. This was no longer going the way she had planned. We are trying to move forward, she said. That is all. There is no reason to make this bigger than it needs to be. I nodded once, slowly. I am not making it bigger, I replied. I am just not making it smaller anymore. Daniel leaned back again, his frustration beginning to surface in small, controlled movements. So what now, he asked. You sold the cottage. Fine. What does that change? I met his gaze without hesitation. Everything, I said. He frowned slightly. How? I folded my hands lightly in my lap, my voice steady, almost calm in a way that surprised even me. It changes what I hold on to, I said, and what I let go of. Rachel straightened, her attention sharpening again. What does that mean? She asked. I let a brief moment pass before answering, not to build tension, but because the answer no longer needed to be rushed. It means I will not be adjusting my life to fit into spaces where I am not wanted, I said. Not during holidays. Not during ordinary days. Not at all. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. You are overreacting, he said, though his voice lacked the certainty it once carried. This is not about one day, I replied. It is about every small moment that led to it. Every time I stepped back so someone else could feel comfortable. Every time I told myself it was not a big deal. Rachel's eyes held mine, searching for something she could still use, something she could still turn. We can fix this, she said. There is no reason to draw lines like this. I shook my head gently. The line was already drawn, I said. I just decided not to stand on the wrong side of it anymore. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was different. Not tense, not uncertain, just settled. Daniel looked at me for a long moment, then glanced at Rachel, as if expecting her to say something that would bring things back under control. She did not. For the first time since they arrived, neither of them had anything left to offer that could change what had already been decided. I stood up slowly, not to end the conversation, but because it had already ended on its own. I think you should go now, I said, my tone neither cold nor warm, just final. Daniel hesitated for a second, then nodded faintly, as if he understood something he could not quite put into words. Rachel stood as well, smoothing her coat with a small, automatic gesture, her expression composed once more, but quieter than before. They walked toward the door without another argument, without another attempt to explain. And as I watched them leave, I realized something simple, something clear. For the first time in a long while, I was not the one being left behind. The door closed softly behind them, the sound quieter than I expected, almost like the house itself was careful not to disturb what had just settled into place. I stood there for a moment, my hand still resting lightly against the edge of the door, listening to the faint sound of their car starting outside, the low hum of the engine, the slow movement of tires pulling away from the curb. I did not follow them to the window this time. I did not need to watch them leave. I already knew what that looked like. Instead, I turned back into the house, walking through the living room at the same steady pace I had kept all afternoon. Nothing had changed in the room. The same furniture, the same quiet air, but something inside it felt different now, as if the space had finally adjusted to the truth instead of waiting for it to be corrected. I sat down in my chair and let my hands rest in my lap, not thinking about what I had said, not replaying the conversation, not questioning whether I should have softened anything. There was nothing left to soften. My phone remained on the counter where I had left it earlier, face down, silent. For a long time, I did not move to pick it up. I let the quiet stay uninterrupted, letting the absence of noise become something I could recognize, something that no longer needed to be filled. As the afternoon light shifted slowly across the floor, I found myself noticing small things I had not paid attention to in years. The way the sunlight reached the edge of the rug but never quite crossed it. The faint reflection of the window in the glass cabinet. The steady rhythm of the clock on the wall, each second passing without hesitation, without waiting for anyone to catch up. I stood up eventually and walked into the kitchen, pouring myself another cup of coffee, even though it was already past the time I usually allowed myself one. The warmth of the mug felt grounding in a way that was simple, uncomplicated. Mine. I carried it back into the living room and sat down again, this time leaning back slightly, allowing my body to relax in a way it had not in a long time. There was no tension left to hold, no expectation left to meet. The phone buzzed once, then again, the sound breaking through the quiet just enough to remind me that something outside this moment still existed. I did not reach for it immediately. When I finally did, I turned it over and glanced at the screen. Daniel. 2 messages. I opened the first one slowly. Mom, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Let us talk again. We can figure this out. The second came just minutes later. You did not have to do this. We were only trying to help. I read both messages without expression, then set the phone back down, this time without turning it face down. I let the words remain visible, not as something I needed to respond to, but as something that had already answered itself. Help. The word lingered for a moment, then faded into something less important. I leaned back in my chair again, my gaze drifting toward the window, where the sky had begun to soften into the early colors of evening. There was no urgency in me now. No need to explain, no need to correct their understanding, no need to make them see what they had chosen not to see before. Some things only become clear after they are already over. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle, letting the quiet hold. Outside, the street remained calm, unchanged, as if nothing significant had happened at all. But inside, something had shifted completely, not with force, not with noise, but with a certainty that did not need to be repeated. And for the first time, I did not feel like I was waiting for anything to come next. The next morning arrived without announcement, just a quiet shift in light that moved slowly across the walls and settled into the corners of the room like it had always belonged there. I woke up earlier than usual, not because something pulled me out of sleep, but because there was nothing left weighing it down. The house felt different in the morning. Not emptier, just clearer. I made my coffee the same way I always had, measuring the grounds, pouring the water, waiting for the familiar sound of it brewing. But this time there was no sense of waiting attached to it. No expectation that someone might walk in, that a call might come, that a message might change anything. Everything had already been said. Everything had already been decided. I carried my cup to the window and stood there for a moment, watching the street as it slowly came to life. A neighbor walked her dog. A car passed by at a steady pace. Ordinary things. Steady things. The kind of rhythm that does not ask for permission to continue. My phone remained on the counter where I had left it the night before. I could see it from where I stood, the screen dark, silent, holding whatever messages might have come after I stopped looking. I did not feel the need to check. Not right away. Instead, I stayed where I was, letting the morning settle into me, letting the quiet confirm what I already understood. There is a point where something shifts, not loudly, not in a way that demands attention, but in a way that changes how everything feels afterward. This was that point. I moved through the house slowly, not out of hesitation, but because there was no reason to rush. I opened a drawer and took out a small notebook I had not used in years, the cover slightly worn, the pages still mostly blank. I sat down at the table and opened it, letting my hand rest on the first page for a moment before writing anything. When I finally did, the words came easily. Not explanations, not questions, just decisions. Simple ones, clear ones, things I would do, places I would go. A life that did not need to be adjusted around someone else's version of family. After a while, I closed the notebook and set it aside, the weight of it light in my hands. I stood up again and walked back to the kitchen, rinsing my cup, placing it carefully in the sink, the motion steady, familiar. Then, finally, I reached for my phone. The screen lit up as soon as I touched it. 3 messages, all from Daniel. I opened the first one. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. The second came a few hours later. I did not realize how it sounded. That is not what I meant. The third was shorter. I am sorry. I read each one slowly, letting the words settle without pushing them away, without pulling them closer. Apologies have their place, but they do not undo understanding. I set the phone down again, this time with the screen facing up, and let it rest there without answering. Not out of anger, not out of punishment, just because there was nothing left that needed to be said right now. I walked back into the living room and sat down, my gaze moving naturally toward the window again, where the sunlight had shifted just enough to reach a little further into the room. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, marking time in the same quiet way it always had. Nothing dramatic had happened. No raised voices. No slammed doors. Just a series of choices, made clearly, followed through completely. And somehow that was enough. I leaned back slightly, letting my shoulders relax, letting the quiet remain exactly as it was. Outside, the day continued without interruption. Inside, so did I. Not waiting. Not adjusting. Not holding on to something that had already let go of me. Just moving forward, one steady moment at a time, with nothing left to prove and nothing left to ask for.